the pandemic Advent, with all due respect to traditional words that are often found on our candles, in our liturgies of the lighting of candles for Advent: hope, peace, joy, love. Good themes, all of them. But how to recontextualize with integrity, worthy of both the Christmas message and the times in which we live. To not be tone deaf, as it were, to Christmas 2020. Thinking these days of Evelyn, little tiny Evelyn, Mike and Linda's granddaughter, and how often I've thought and prayed to God that she would be strong and grow, and how much she must have overcome. I'm only imagining from my distance. And yet, she comes. In spite of all the odds, yet she came. And so I thought, that's a great phrase. Yet he comes to comfort. That is my sentence or my theme for the first Sunday of Advent. Yet, in spite of all of what we've been experiencing, he comes to comfort, to embrace. This week I started out thinking also about the shortest verse in the Bible. Do you remember? Of course, we've all memorized this. Jesus wept. John chapter 11, verse 35. We were weeping this week because my son-in-law's father was hospitalized for coronavirus, then his aunt, and in the middle of the week, honestly, our thoughts were very grave, very, very heavy. And I asked God, do you weep? And I remembered that verse. And then that led me to think about Isaiah's prophesying about the Messiah, that he would not even break or bend a bruised reed. And my heart feeling bruised. Or would not quench a smoldering wick. That sensitivity, that tenderness, that comfort. Yet he comes to comfort and to embrace us. I think of the theme that I'd like to carry, even beyond Advent, even a more expansive theme, as I reflected on just getting ready for these 4 Sundays and then Christmas Eve, is just the notion of moving from lament to creativity and using that in all kinds of contexts. And we'll play with that. Let's play with that notion. Not that we're always sad or we're always in lament, but we move from that spirit of lament to creativity and all the possibilities of seeing God in that. So the scripture from the New Testament I read is, after Jesus had been born, in chapter 2 of the Gospel of Luke, Mary and Joseph took him to Jerusalem so that he could be presented, offered up to the Lord, as was the custom in Israel. And there was a man there whose name was Simeon. And this man was righteous and devout, and he had been told in his heart by the Spirit of God that he would not depart from this earth until he had laid his eyes upon God's anointed Messiah. And so on that day he arose and went to the temple, and there he sees Mary and Joseph holding the baby Jesus in their arms. He goes up to them and said, lifted the child and said, "Master, now you are dismissing your servant in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you prepared in the presence of all the people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory of your people Israel." And the child's mother and father were quite astonished by the prayer of this man Simeon. So he blessed them. And then he turned to Mary. And he said, "This child is destined for the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too." There's more in those words. There's much in those words, I should say. Much to take in. For me, never before have I experienced, just in my life, in the world around us, such a close feeling, interweaving of the stories of both Christmas and Easter. The story of incarnation and of suffering and death and resurrection. And so it hits me how deep God's incarnation is in Jesus, and how deep his reconciliation is in Jesus. No, God is more. Deeper incarnation means that God is in the very tissues, so to speak, sharing the vulnerability of our family very recently, so very close to death, loss of loved ones. My mind staggered contemplating this possible loss, those grave thoughts. God is in our stories. He's in our history, our personal stories, both conscious and unconscious, our brave as well as our grave, and of course, one who had experienced the grave would know how to be present with us, with life in the midst of our tough struggle. Let's come back and let's see how this word can help us move towards new life.